4% loss, you're looking at a good 25% increase in all the grain prices. That's grains.
And of course, we know that governments do this. You know, they have a real problem and they mask it with a fake excuse or another problem or a fake explanation, etc. Less crop outputs, which is 3 to 4%, which is very high. It's above the margin. I was going to say margin of error, but it's above a natural loss percentage from a normal year, which makes the inflation go way up. So to mask that, the governments are saying other things like maybe you'll say tariffs or something else like that. They're doing something to mask the root cause of what's happening. Hello, everybody, and welcome again to the Nassar 17 podcast. We're blessed again to have a new guest to my audience, but somebody I've been listening to since, I think, 2016, 2015. And I originally, Dave, I found your channel, Adapt 2030. I think you had an interview with John Casey or somebody else referenced your podcast, and that's how I found you. And then, you know, I've been catching as you know, you with the busy lifestyle. I do catch your podcasts. I don't catch every one, but I catch a lot of them. And I like how you present your messages to people in a helpful manner. And I appreciate that. And I also don't see you kind of getting into what we call fear porn. You just try to tell people realistically what it is and how to prepare. So I like that. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Appreciate you having me. And yes, everybody listening today, take the information for what you will, use it the way you want to, pass it to others if you feel there's value. If it's not for you, then it's not for you, and then move on. Because that's truly what it is. All information is not for everybody all the time. Some is, some's not. I talk about cycles in the sun that are responsible for the rise and fall of civilization through the last 8,000 years here on the planet, how the changing magnetic fields on the sun will change our jet streams and cloud cells, and that will reduce the amount of total overall food we can produce on the planet. And when you have less food, your society collapses or reduces before there's a restructuring. And then, you know, some 15 to 20 years later, the sun turns back on and then everything locks back in place and we get abundant food growing for another 400 years or so. And then you can follow this all through history. Now, sometimes there's more intense cycles, sometimes there's lighter cycles, but it all culminates around less food production, means an upset in the economy, population migration, and the way that governments oversee people needs to change. And that's standard, what I call the fingerprint of the grand solar minimum that we find through history. Those three things change, and we're in the midst of that change right now. And that's the message I want to talk about today. I agree with you. I'd like to define what the grand solar minimum is. We know that we're talking about less output from the sun, but what that means and how that'll affect everybody. And the other thing that I'd like to piggyback in is stratospheric aerosol injection, also known as chemtrailing. But I'll let you go ahead and let's say you're a brand new listener, let's give them the overview of what the grand solar minimum is. You know, there's a couple factors here. So if you start off at the very simplest and then walk through me with the cycles of this, we're at solar maximum right now when we're just stepping off of solar maximum. And this is the 11.8 year regular cycle that we go through on our sun. We come to solar minimum and solar maximum, solar minimum, solar maximum on this, let's say 12-year cycle.
There are a few things you can count on in a major disaster. Having your water supply cut off is one of them. With the Alexa Pure Emergency Water Bank, you'll have months of drinking water in your home. Everyone else will stand in line waiting to get just a few bottles. It's one of the easiest, most affordable ways to store emergency water, and it takes up hardly any space. The Alexa Pure Emergency Water Bank includes 1 BPA-free liner, comes with a siphon pump for extracting water, provides easy-to-follow instructions, fits just about any bathtub, large or small, fills quickly in 30 minutes or less, holds up to 65 gallons of water, and keeps water fresh for up to 16 weeks, holds about 2 months of water for one person. A person can generally survive without water for about 3 days. However, the exact amount of time depends on many factors, including age, activity level, and overall health. Don't gamble with your life and well-being. Being prepared is easier than ever with Civilization Cycle and Alexa Pure.
In a minimum phase, usually there's more cloud cover, more cosmic rays can come in, the magnetic field's not as strong, and we usually get more rains at this time. There's a lot of peer-reviewed research on solar minimums just in general on the regular 12-year cycle, or 11.8 years. There's just more rainfall. And solar maximum, usually there's more drought. Temperatures rise a little bit because obviously there's stronger solar activity, getting more activity from the sun. And at the same time, you get into what I would consider a drying phase. It's a little bit drier, not as much cloud cover because there's not as many cosmic rays coming in. Okay, well, once you come through several of those cycles, you come back to what they call the centennial minimum, which is around 100-year cycle. And this will lap up and overlap with some of these Gleisberg and Schwab cycles. And these step out in time a little bit versus the 11 or 12-year cycle. Then we're getting something in the, let's say, a century cycle. But then on top of that, you can come into something more heavy and powerful of the 400-year. Regular, what I would consider very, very low solar activity for almost a full solar cycle of 10 or 12 years of very, very low solar activity. That in itself wreaks havoc with our jet streams and cloud cells. But this only occurs once every 400 years. And if you trace back their history, at least back through like the Homeric minimum, which is 6 of these cycles going back 2,400 years, like 400 years before the birth of Christ. Once you start to look at that and see just within this tiny time frame of rise and fall of empires, kingdoms, emperors over in China specifically, and what you see with like the classic Maya, and there's so many instances from Rome itself through North Africa and what you consider Asia or the Caucasus, all the way out through the stands, everywhere there's a fingerprint of this, where food production declines and population moves. Now, if you knew this was a cycle and you had we have much better instrumentation now so we can see in the sun, is it declining or the magnetic field? Is it weakening? The irradiance coming off the sun. I know a lot of people like to push at total solar irradiance to measure a grand solar minimum, but that's not really the measure. It's the magnetic field intensity on the sun. So watts per meter squared when you have a solar panel, like for example, in a solar grand minima or grand solar minimum, that would decrease by at least 5 watts per meter squared, striking the surface of a solar panel or the earth. Not all that great. You're talking about 340 to 350 watts per meter squared on the TSI. So to take 5 off of that, it's not like life ending, but it would definitely decrease irradiance for the plants and the uptake for the sunlight and photosynthesis and that cycle. But it's just when the sun goes into a really low state of electromagnetism, let's say, that reflects on our planet. And these jet streams and cloud cells that lock our precipitation patterns into place, that allow us to know when to plant and when to harvest because the rains come at this time and the season changes at this time, that's thrown out the window. And then you get into this phase where, as we're seeing now, there's extremes everywhere. Well, they had to have an excuse for this, and they called it global warming, because you had to explain to the people, because they would see it with their own eyes eventually as we get into the intensification phase of this cycle. And governments are, I'm telling you, absolutely unequivocally, governments absolutely knew the onset dates of this cycle. And that's why there's so much massive change happening right now, because this is a natural cycle. And governments are going to ride on top of this natural cycle to try to achieve a greater outcome. And when you look at it in this more like wide-reaching, all-encompassing view of why is the world changing so much right now, is the one question. Like, why is our economy changing? Why is there so much population migration? And why are governments across the world shifting? Well, that's the same 3 things that happen every single time that this event occurs. And then the big thing is the food production gets knocked out. So with less food production, you're going to get massive inflation. And all people are going to be doing is spending money on food, which puts most people's life costs out of reach for most. So then you start to think about that and how do you deal with that? And that's sort of this grand solar. Oh, and then Brock, one last thing. there's also, once you have the 400-year cycle, there's a coupling of those as well. 5 of those is a cycle in itself in about 2,000-year period. And then if you keep going out as well, you get heavier, you get Bray cycles, and you can come out into different depths of cycles, 3,000-year cycles, 6,000-year cycles, 12,000-year cycles. But, we need to, bring it back into something on human scale here. So 400 years enough to wipe out previous civilizations and topple them. So what's it going to do to our modern, very fragile society?
Cause a lot of chaos for sure.
Oh, we're seeing that already, though. That's the whole thing, is why is there so much chaos? Please, if anybody's listening, ask yourself, and don't lie to yourself. Why is there so much chaos if there's a known cycle to absolutely start wrecking food production, and you're seeing your food prices go up and up and up? You could blame it on COVID. You could blame it on whatever you want. But there's always a ready-made excuse for the event that is happening.
Right.
Based on these same cycles. Always an excuse there ready for you.
So you're saying this, let's do small, medium, large in the cycle. So the small cycle is 10 to 12 years. Then the medium cycle, what'd you say that was?
The century.
A century, okay. And then the big cycle is 400 years. So obviously, you're never going to have somebody to testify on the medium and the large cycle because of the duration of it and the average human lifespan. So are you saying if I understand correctly, you're saying that we're lined up for one of the big cycles, the 400-year cycle, like pretty much right now in 2025?
Yes, if not a 2,000-year power cycle as well. Not exactly that date, 2025 on January 1st or, June 2nd or something, but the intensity trigger, whatever you consider that being, to the point where everybody realizes it, and it's really getting to the crop losses. I did a bunch of research. I'll explain about my research on the crop forecasting front here for you. But we're looking at bigger losses this year, 3 to 4% of most global grains across the entire planet. So add into that with all these.
That's big.
That's big. Yes, it is. And for anybody
what's
out there,
an average year? A 1% loss?
Yeah, 1 to 2. They've run back in through the early 1970s, and you get you'll find some points where they lost up to like 5%, 3% to 5%. So this 4% loss, you're looking at a good 25 to 40% increase in all the grain prices.
Okay, that's huge.
That's grains.
So that's what you're saying is, and of course we know that governments do this. They have a real problem and they mask it with a fake excuse or another problem or a fake explanation, etc. So what we're saying is, and what you're saying is, of course, we're going to expound on this, but you're basically saying we have a lower solar output from the sun, thus creating less crop outputs, which is 3 to 4%, which is very high. It's above the margin. I was going to say margin of error, but it's above a natural loss percentage. So it's triple a natural loss percentage from a normal year, which makes the inflation go way up. So to mask that, the governments are saying other things like maybe you'll say tariffs or something else like that. They're doing something to mask the root cause of what's happening. Is that right?
Yes. And it's not that this year is specifically lower in solar output than, the last 100 or 200 or 400 years. It's the cycle intensity itself with the disruption of the magnetic field. And most people believe it seemed that we were one cycle off. John's research and Valentina Zarkova and many others had put when we were coming down off of this previous solar maximum, we would enter into a cooling phase. Well, it appears that it is indeed this one here. Even NASA and the European Space Agency are talking about like 3 to 5 sunspots coming in some solar maximum months for this next solar cycle that we're entering. I guess it would be all the way until and through solar cycle, say 27. So with these space agencies coming out and putting on record with their sunspot forecasts going out, through the next 12 years plus or so, as we come off this one, we rise off in the minimum and then come back. They're putting incredibly low solar activity, which is telling that they would come out and put such low numbers. And that matches up with something in the 1640s This is kind of low. So, there's a lot of indicators out there for eyes to see.
Would that
And if you
be,
look-
are you referring to the Maunder minimum? Is that what, I think John was talking about that. I listened to his audiobook. So the last time we had record was the Maunder minimum, which was 16 and 1700s. Is that right?
That's right. 1640 was the official, as they say, onset dates. Now, looking back in history. So we have history books to use as our crystal ball. But again, is history what it truly is? I mean, the reasons for the wars and the collapse and the population migration, was that truly because of the wars, or was it because of something else that triggered them to move? And then our history books have been rewritten to not allow us to see that it is a cycle, that it was just France was fighting here, Russia was fighting over there, the czars were fighting here, whatever it is. There's always going to be some sort of excuse, right? So is the history that we're given the true reason that all the collapse occurred during that time and the complete restructuring of Europe from the 16 into the early 1700s? Or was it because of this event that upset the apple cart across all genres of, wealth and country and commerce, economy, and like you say, at that time of the aristocracy, the ruling over Europe, that was completely upset. And we came into something very different at the beginning in the 1700s. That's what I'm saying. The way that the overseership of humans on the planet here changes. Like the way governments rule over people needs to change because the magnetic field changes. So that's the thing about our human lobes in our brains. They're electric. So if the magnetic field's going to change, the way you perceive reality and information around you is going to change in that magnetic field also. So the way you observe reality is literally changing by the day also, as this magnetic field changes. Yeah. So as governments, you're going to have to change that, because what you try to use to oversee and rule the people in 1640, burning them alive, sure ain't going to float anymore. Hasn't for centuries. So whatever they have been doing with central banking and overseership in this never-ending war cycle that we're in, this needs to stop, and it is stopping because so many people are seeing through it now. So you see, what are we restructuring into is more the question. Like, can you front run and bend around the corner? Like, how are they going to restructure? How the economy is going to restructure? How's this food growing going to restructure?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. But that's a really important point that I think I've been thinking about that. How is everybody viewing everything? I have a truth, what would be called a truther channel, or alternative, facts, whatever you want to call it. Some say the C word, conspiracy, but a lot of that stuff has proven out to be true. So we had called this the Great Awakening, which I'm sure you've heard that term, because people are realizing what's really going on and trying to basically make our country and our world a better place by now participating in making it better, which is what this whole podcast is going to be about, preparing for something that we see coming. So the structure of reality, is something that we've debated with the Great Awakening. And this is tied in, you're saying, to the magnetosphere, which is the protective layer that God put there around our Earth to keep us, from being fried by gamma rays, X-rays, etc., and absorb negative radiation so that life can flourish. But you're saying because the pole is shifting, the magnetic north is moved and shifting. And since we're a magnetic and electric being, our nervous system is electric, it's literally affecting the way we perceive things. And I had not considered that before. That's such an interesting point you made.
Yeah, now live in the soup now. All right, so now just everybody out there listening, can you please just think about your life for the last, say, 3 to 4 years? Not that the COVID was so much in there, but the disruption that would allow so much change to occur in such a short period of time, and give an all-encompassing, overreaching excuse of it was COVID for everything that changed. Everybody was scatterwave during that time. The amount of fear that, everybody's brains weren't working correctly anyway. Mm-hmm. Like the way that people were looking at reality, there's a full mental asylum on the planet here. But was it really? Or was that the intensity shift of sometimes things move very slowly and then they shift for a very short period of time, much, much faster, and then they slow down again? Was it that somebody knew in advance that the magnetic shift was there at that time, and that was the reason that COVID was put in place? to mask
that's
that
interesting.
rapid shift that you would have seen. So if there would have been no COVID and all that rapid shift of magnetic change, the way you're perceiving reality and all this, that would be unexplainable for most people. But with COVID there and everything was completely wrecked and just rolled over with a steamroller, all that change that came through, the way your mind was interpreting reality, the way it just shock and awe, and everything was malfunctioning in almost everybody's brains because the magnetic field was shifting at a great intensity at that time. So think about how that something was overlaid on top of that to mask that awareness that people would have seen without it. So we've come into I wouldn't say a slowdown period, but we didn't get that rapid 0 to 60 burst like we had. I consider, you can disagree with what I'm saying, but the perception had to be managed.
No, I agree.
In that time.
No, I totally agree. I haven't seen it from your viewpoint, and I think you made a fantastic point.
Well, what comes next, though? I mean, once we step off this solar maximum here, which we are now, once we start stepping down,
a lot of change quickly.
Yeah, very much. As much as you've seen, during COVID, it's gonna shift even faster, because here's the next thing that's inbound is crop shortages everywhere. And how do you manage people's expectations of having more food or less food, or their government being able to provide food? So
give them a distraction so they don't think about it.
Yeah, but the expectation is, you government, you're in control. I'm starving. My kids don't have food. Our families, everything's extremely exorbitant price. I can't even live barely. I can't pay for heating and a house, no gas, and I'm spending all my money on food. Once it comes to that point, I'm not saying it is today, but once it comes to that point, you just need to look over at China through history, and they called that the mandate from heaven. And that was the emperor of the time. Well, they thought they had come down from the seed of the god from the stars, that gave them the mandate to rule over China at the time. If they couldn't feed their people, that was literally a sign from the heavens that said, your ruler is no longer valid. It can't even feed the people of China. You are allowed to remove them. So
makes sense.
Yeah. You can't even provide the basics. The security's gone, crime's through the roof. There's very little food. There's famines. And of course, the wars come. So you're looking at, and the emperor has absolutely lost it. There's no more control. So society in unison agrees that emperor no longer has the right to rule anybody. What happens when it comes to our supposedly quote unquote republic here when that happens?
Well, that's a good question. And I kind of wanted to, I'll shelve the chemtrail question for later.
No, I could go into that. I really wanted to touch on that as well. This is so integral to what's happening.
Okay. Well, let me give you the audience kind of knows this, but I was a defense contractor and worked a lot with airplanes. Now, I will tell you all, I have seen the actual airplanes with the nozzles on them for spraying. Okay. I know that they're real. You can find pictures. There might even be some archived on my Telegram channel. The question is why? Now this is my working thesis. So obviously anything on an airplane is 10 times what a car part would be, because it has to be certified, has to have traceability of the part, etc., built to a higher quality standard. Okay, everyone should know that. So why are they going to spend so much money retrofitting these passenger planes, putting super expensive stainless steel, medical grade, aerospace grade stainless steel tanks in there, and the nozzles? I mean, the retrofit could cost, I don't know this, but it could cost $5 million conceivably to retrofit one plane to do spraying. So why are they and then the chemical mixture, which we know is made of aluminum, barium, and strontium. We know that because people have tested the dust after it's settled onto a vehicle or something like that. So we also know that it changes soil pH, which is not great for crops. The acidity of the soil, as you know, you're a farmer, acidity of the soil is one of the main things you check other than moisture content and nutrient content. Acidity of the soil is very important. And so why would they be doing it and hiding it? And now this is my working thesis, because especially when I was living in Michigan, we had a lot of stratospheric aerosol injection. I used to be observant and find that they would do it in late afternoon, so that those real high, thin clouds, which they will tell you those are cirrus clouds, but they're not. They're artificial. So they would come over, and now because of the way the atmosphere is, those clouds, if they're coming over at the right time, like towards nighttime, they'll actually trap some heat in locally so that that heat doesn't escape to the upper atmosphere. So they'll tell you that they're doing, if you actually get someone to admit to it, they'll tell you they're doing it to reflect sun rays because of global warming back out into the atmosphere. But I think that based on my observation, my running thesis is that they're doing it to trap heat in locally over certain areas in critical times so that the cooler temperatures are not as effective. And Michigan is a heavy agricultural state. So that's my thesis. And now I bounced it back to an expert. So what do you think about that?
I'm no expert. I'm just a delver into the information. Solar radiation management is a layer of that onion that not a lot of people consider either. So as we come into solar minimum here, the one natural effect of that is more galactic cosmic rays will enter through our atmosphere, and those will collide in the, say 25 to 30,000 foot band, and they will then ricochet off these muons and then create cloud particles. Now, a lot of the research that's been done, and the expert really you want to listen to and look at is Heinrich Svensmark. And he was the first one doing this experiments in cloud chambers, and he wrote a whole book called The Cloud Mystery. And after his books and research came out, they forbid him from doing any more research. And they tried to ruin his career. They took his laboratory away, and they had to get self-funded and create his own laboratory from scratch. Wasn't allowed to publish in the peer-reviewed circles for a fair few years. So what he was showing is that when these cosmic rays come in and they do collide in the upper atmosphere, or the middle atmosphere, I should say, and create these clouds, there's 7 times more cloud building than there would be without any cosmic rays interfering or affecting or interacting with our atmosphere. Now, as was told to me by a person who was familiar also in this program, the public layer is the one that is given out here. It's like, it could change the soil pH. They're doing something. You can see when they put it behind the plane that it thins out into, I think they call them homogeneous clouds, like man-made clouds. There's actually a real name for that.
I've heard that before. Yep.
Yeah. But what they're not talking about is that with those nanoparticulate, what are they? Metals. Nanoparticulate metals.
Yep.
When the cosmic rays come in and collide with those particulates, they lose their charge and they do not have a cloud building effect. So as it was explained, solar radiation management is another layer of this geoengineering onion that if they were to stop all spraying, just the runaway effect in a solar minimum on the regular 12-year cycle would bring us biblical floods beyond, they called it rivers from the sky. That is the solar radiation management end of it. They're actually trying to stop cloud building because they know that a weakened magnetosphere continues to get weaker and weaker and weaker every cycle into the solar lows on the regular 12-year cycle.
So you're saying, can I ask a question? So
please.
You're saying that because the magnetosphere is weaker, the solar rays are entering more easily. So that there's more rays entering the surface of the Earth, and that is going to cause melting, which will cause major flooding.
Yes, the interaction building more clouds. So you have to think about if the galactic cosmic rays are not there. Right now, where the sun's in an intense phase, so we're at solar maximum. There's very few galactic cosmic rays coming in comparatively on solar low. Like you can take a look. Oslo has, anywhere you want to take a look at, there's a direct reverse correlation between how many galactic cosmic rays are coming in compared to what the intensity of the sun is. It's an inverse. When we're at solar maximum, there's very few cosmic rays coming in. And when we're on the minimum, there's an enormous amount. It boosts up. In the last solar cycle 24 and 23, they were showing just absurd record highs of galactic cosmic rays coming in at the regular 12-year cycle. So think about that. Just anybody out there pondering information, this is a dual use program. Now watch this spraying ramp up as we get into solar minimum because they want to try to prevent the cloud building and these epic floods that would wipe out even more crop production.
So they are reflecting solar rays.
Well, the galactic cosmic rays, this is the cloud building particle that comes in. This is the thing that they were trying to nullify with, was these different types of metals in the atmosphere. Whenever that one particle would hit a piece of metal, it loses its charge.
Man, that's interesting, because I assumed that they were using it for latent heat or something to trap heat in the upper atmosphere and keep it warmer longer. That's what I thought they were doing with the clouds, but you're sending me on a new rabbit trail.
Yeah, well, that makes sense, because, if you keep showing all these cooler temperatures and record cold temperatures when we're supposed to have, runaway global warming, that doesn't match either, does it?
No, it doesn't.